Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, I am joined by professional writer Chris Orcutt. Chris has over 30 years of experience in writing, and while he was perfecting his skills as a fiction writer in his 20s and 30s, he also made a living as a journalist, an instructor, and a corporate speechwriter. So we're going to be talking to him about his career, and he also has 12 meticulously crafted novels. So we're going to be talking to him about everything that he's up to and going to be up to. So, Chris, thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure, Curtis. Thank you for having me.
Why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Well, I think you covered it pretty well. I was sitting back listening to everything you were saying, and I was like, "Who is that guy?" Um, I I'm not really sure what to add. I think as you mentioned, I've been a journalist and I've taught uh, English at the college level for a while. I was a corporate speechwriter and continued to write my fiction every day, a la Scott Turow, the guy really invented the legal thriller. Presumed Innocent was really the first legal thriller, and he wrote that a good deal of it in between court cases and while commuting on the train. So he would be on the train and writing with a legal pad. And while I was teaching high school, while I was a journalist first, I was writing my fiction, in my off hours. Then I was a high school teacher of American Studies, that is American history and English. And I would get up at, 4 o'clock in the morning and, you know, work on my writing until I needed to go teach school. And then when I got into the corporate world, uh, I did like Scott Turow, and that is, uh, would write during my commute, usually on a legal pad. And then, I was working with for Merrill Lynch in corporate communications right around 9/11. I say right around on 9/11. And I lived just outside of New York City, and I worked at the World Financial Center in Manhattan, Lower Manhattan. In fact, my office was directly across the street from from the Twin Towers. And I'll never forget that actually the day before 9/11, so it would have been the 10th of September, I'll never forget, I was eating shrimp lo mein and sitting on my credenza. My office looked out on the street there. I think that was West Street. I can't remember. But it looked right out on the street. And I looked out, and if I angled my head just right, I could see the top of the North Tower. And I had this feeling, I was like, at that time, people were concerned about a repeat of I believe it was 1993 bombing, excuse me, where terrorists took a car or a truck laden with explosives and put it underneath the North Tower. And I said to myself in my office, I was like, everybody's worried about them putting a bomb underneath the building. What if somebody flew a plane into it? My hand to God, I had that thought, Curtis. And then that night, as I was walking out, I was working late. It was around probably 6:30 or so, 7 o'clock. I was walking out to go to the subway, and something told me to turn around. And I turned around and I had this view of the towers and went home. And then 9/11, the sky has never been bluer. I have never seen such a blue sky, and I don't think I'll ever see one. It was a really, really deep blue, indigo blue, you know? And I was on the train commuting in when the message came over the PA that something had happened at the Twin Towers. And after some debate, the train conductor, they took us into Grand Central. My wife and I met at our pre-designated meeting spot, which was the New York Public Library on Fifth Avenue. It's only a couple of blocks from Grand Central, and we went over to her office in on Eighth Avenue. We saw the South Tower come down, which was horrendous. We were on the roof of the building looking down when it came down. And after that, we had to hike out of Manhattan, Curtis. It was, I forget, is Manhattan 8 miles long or 14? I think it's 14. Well, we had to hike many, many miles. We hiked out of Manhattan. The only bridge that was open was this really small bridge at the very tip of Manhattan into the Bronx. And my former manager picked us up there and we went home. This is all, I don't know how I got on the the 9/11 train talking about it, but I think, I can rein this back in. I think the thing about 9/11 was shortly after that, my wife basically said, look, life is short, Chris, and this is this, meaning fiction writing, is what you want to do. So I want you to focus on it full time. And then shortly thereafter, Merrill Lynch started offering these basically voluntary severance programs, and I took it. And that's when I started becoming a full-time fiction writer. It came out of 9/11.
Okay, well, you have also earned a living as a journalist and instructor and a corporate speechwriter. How you want to talk about that part of your career?
Yes, absolutely. I loved writing for newspapers. My first job out of college was as the cub reporter for a small weekly newspaper that is now defunct. It was called the Millbrook Roundtable, and it was part of this group of weekly newspapers in the Hudson Valley here in New York. There were 7 or 8 of these newspapers, part of Taconic newspapers. Unfortunately, the internet killed a lot of small local newspapers. But my first job out of college was writing for this weekly newspaper, and I loved it. I really did. I really enjoyed, the characters, I getting to meet people, and I did this profile piece every week where I would find some obscure person in the community who had an interesting story to tell. I'll always remember this Silver Star winner. Silver Star, he won the Silver Star in World War II, and I'll never forget him telling me he was a bombardier for I forget the exact plane, but he was a bombardier, and he was flying over Germany, and no, excuse me, he was flying over North Africa at the time, and he said he looked down his sight at the area he was going to be bombing, and he said that he saw this glint of metal, this shiny glint, and it turns out that that shiny glint was General Patton's helmet, because he used to have, apparently he had this glaring this glaring helmet that he would wear when he was in battle. So I really enjoyed uh, journalism. I worked for a weekly newspaper, and then I wrote for a daily newspaper here in New York, in Poughkeepsie, New York. It's the Poughkeepsie Journal. It's the oldest newspaper in New York. Uh, I enjoyed it. I what I enjoyed most, Curtis, was the investigative aspect of it. I'm quite proud of the fact that you know, I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I single-handedly kept my community, Millbrook, New York, where I went to high school and to some extent grew up. Uh, I kept that community from being taken advantage of by an unscrupulous developer. This developer came into the community and he claimed to have done all of these various projects, and he had his eye on this historical site in the community, Bennett College. It was a small women's college in the 20th century, or mid 20th century and early 20th century. And he had his sights on this place. He was talking, big game. He's going to develop it and he's going to put in condominiums, et cetera. And something just felt off about the guy. And so I took it upon myself. I went to my editor and I said, I think this guy's fishy. I think this guy's a crook. That's what I think. And so I started looking into uh, these projects that he claimed to have, been a part of. And I called a number of the basically the town planning departments in these communities in Florida where he claimed to have the projects. And the guy pulled the blueprints and he told me this guy isn't on any of these blueprints. This guy has had nothing to do with these projects. And I revealed that in a article that came out that week. And within a couple of days, the guy and his crew were gone. Um, Never got a thank you from the from the town mayor or anything. I would have liked that. Uh, so, there was the newspaper reporting in my very early 20s. Then I taught U.S. history and English at the high school level in Freeport, Maine for a couple of years. I loved teaching, Curtis, but it was very difficult to make a living at it. It really was. It's probably in my case good that it didn't pay well because I think had it paid well, had it been comfortable, I probably wouldn't have had the impetus to leave that job and to strike out and, work for Merrill Lynch and to work for JP Morgan and do corporate speech writing, um, and which led to me doing my fiction full time. So I guess I'll mention one thing about the corporate speech writing. I One thing that I learned in it was that you really, speech writing is really an art. And the way in which it's an art is that you really have to spend some time with the person for whom you're writing a speech because you really have to be attuned to their speaking style, their cadence, problem words that they might have. There was one executive I was writing for who had something of a lisp, and that was a challenge to try to find, avoiding words with, S's in it. It's not easy. Um, so, it's been a seemingly sinuous journey of getting to the point where I'm now a full-time fiction writer and have written over a dozen novels and this 9 part or 9 book uh, novel that I've been working on for the past 10 years. But it's really all related because it's always been writing, writing or the teaching of writing, communication has always been the through line.
Let's take a quick break.
In Kansas, blind vending operators are vanishing without a trace. No bodies, no witnesses, only silence. Detective Michael Miguel thought he had seen everything, but this case pulls him into something far darker, a web of institutional corruption so deep it was never meant to be uncovered. When vulnerable blind people disappear and bureaucracies close ranks, one question remains: who will fight for justice? As Miguel digs deeper, he uncovers a conspiracy reaching the highest levels of power, a system that exploits the very people it was designed to protect. The truth is buried in paperwork, hidden behind closed doors, guarded by those who have everything to lose. Some conspiracies hide in plain sight. This one hides in the dark. Iron Cane Media presents The Blind Conspiracy, written by Mikhail Battles Sr., available now on Amazon.
Well, kind of talk about your novels, kind of tell the listeners about the novels and what they can expect when they read them and where they can get them.
Oh, so would you like me to talk about the Bodaciously novels now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, Bodaciously True and Totally Awesome is it's basically one giant novel in 9 parts. And I'm going to be releasing the first novel is coming out on January 20 of 2026. So that's basically just a month away. And every 12 to 15 weeks, there'll be a new episode or another novel. And I wrote it to be like the 80s nighttime soap operas where, you some of the novels will be left on a cliffhanger, some will just be continuations of the story. Um, it's a coming of age and teen romance story about teens in the 80s in the suburbs. And one way I've described it is it's like War and Peace meets Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Those a number of those 80s, those 80s comic movies. Um, there was something about that movie that when I saw it when I was, 10, 11 years old, and having lived through the 80s and been a teen in the 80s, I wanted to capture some of the zeitgeist that we lived through and lived with in the 1980s, and the fact that my generation was largely underparented, or if not outright unparented. And that's not meant to be a slight against our parents. It's just a fact. It's in many cases both of our parents were working, and we were the original latchkey kids. We were coming home from school to an empty house. Our parents are working, and we were left to our own devices. And that's a double-edged sword. There was a lot of freedom. We had a lot of freedom, and we learned to figure things out for ourselves. And we kind of depended on and leaned on our friends, or our friends were basically our support system. But the negative side of that was, teen sex, teen pregnancy, um, alcoholism, drugs, it ran the gamut. So what I've done with Bodaciously is I've basically created what I call a teen epic. I As I started to write this, Curtis, about in 2015, I got about 2 years into the process and I realized that this wasn't going to be, it didn't want to be just a, a novel the size of, the length of something like Catcher in the Rye, which has always been held up as the quintessential coming of age novel. I realized that I really wanted to dig down into the emotional core of what it is to be an adolescent. And so the 9 books follow the central character, Avery Craig, or Avery Ace Craig, his nickname is Ace, and his friends over the course of 2 years, 1986, 1987. And, it's the story of a young man and his friends, learning about the nature of love and true love and contending with basically, having that freedom I just mentioned and learning how to live with it and figuring out uh, the solutions to problems on their own and depending on each other. Uh, and a lot of these conflicts and adventures that teens had here in the U.S. in the suburbs in the 80s. Uh, so I've spent the last 10 years writing this giant novel and splitting it up into 9 books. And the reason I did it this way is because I, there have been other authors who have created a series or a character, like I think of the Harry Potter books. And I didn't want readers to have to wait years between each novel. I also wanted the continuity, the continuity that comes when you write the one big thing and you write it together over time. The trouble is that if you go away from a novel that you've written, you come back to that world, it gets a little hazy. You forget exactly what a character looks like, or you're not as attuned to their dialogue, the way they speak. Um, so I've spent the past 10 years working on this, and now it's going to be coming out in January, and the I learned a lot out of that process, and I think it'd probably be better if I just, if you're ready for me to, I can just talk about what that process was like.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. One of the things that I learned, see, what I was trying to do, Curtis, with Bodaciously was I wanted to create a time machine for readers, particularly readers my age, Generation X, to be able to escape the craziness of today. I mean, whatever someone's political beliefs are, we can all agree that just the internet, AI, algorithms, GPS, smartphones, all of these things, it can be too much. It's just, and I think, and I started to talk to a number of people my age, and I noticed a commonality that we were all longing for a simpler time. And we would get talking about, hey, remember when we were teens and all of the stuff that we would do in the 80s? And, it was so great. We had so much freedom. And I started thinking about that. And I said, you know what? I want to write the ultimate coming of age novel. I want to write something that is a time machine back to the 80s. But what I found, Curtis, in listening to the professional reviewers as well as other reviewers that have read the book on NetGalley, Library Thing, and my own set of personal readers like friends and family, what I found is that I didn't just create a time machine back to the 80s. I created a time machine back to anyone's adolescence. And I didn't intend to do that, but I've had older people say to me, gosh, Chris, this took me back to when I was a teen in the 50s. And then I've had young people, members of Gen Z write to me and say, gosh, this took me back to when I was in high school just recently. And, so it seems like I succeeded at getting at that emotional core of what it is to be a teenager, the hijinks that we all engaged in and the unsure of yourself or trying things out, trying on uh, various personalities or ways of living. So, what I was setting out to do was create this time machine, but it was 10 years in the making. It was 10 years of writing. It was 10 years of every day, 1,500 words a day. It was 10 years of waking up every morning being not disgusted with, but not approving of all of my characters' choices. There were times where I would wake up in the morning and I'd be like, oh, the characters are doing this, this, and this, and it makes me uncomfortable, and and having to, you got to step back. Your job as the author is not to judge what your characters do. This is something that Anton Chekhov, the Russian short story writer, said. Your job isn't to judge the characters and what they do. Your job is basically to report on what they do. And so it was, 10 years of this internal conflict where the characters were doing things that I didn't necessarily approve of or that made me uncomfortable. It was 10 years of having to face the doubts every day, Curtis, of, you know, what's going to happen with this? Is anybody going to want to read this? Are when it's published, is anybody going to buy it? Anybody going to read it? Uh, it was 10 years of getting up each day, and some days you don't know where it's going. And the novelist E.L. Doctorow said that writing a novel is like driving across the country at night using only your headlights. So you only drive at night and you've got your headlights. That's as far as you can see in front of you. And but I would add to that, I think that's true, but it's really, driving at night, you can only see as far as your headlights, but it's also raining and there are detour signs all over the place. And, you don't know sometimes if you go down a detour, if it's going to lead back to the main road. Sometimes in the writing, you start down. I liken writing to basically mining. In the old days of gold miners or silver miners, you're digging and blasting through rock, and you think there's a vein of gold. You think there's a vein of gold down there or a vein of silver. And sometimes you go all the way into the tunnel, you go all the way down, and there's nothing. And you got to turn around and go back. So it was 10 years of all of those, you know, the big one is, Curtis, it's the dealing with the doubts. it's I would every day, you have these gremlins, these gremlins that come at you, and nobody's going to be interested in this. Why are you even doing it? If this was such a great subject, somebody would have written this by now. Somebody would have created a teen epic already. Um, it was all of these doubts and concerns and worries that I would have to deal with every day. So, I'm not ashamed to admit, I'm not ashamed to say that, I did not write this all alone. You know, I I prayed every day. I mean, I'm not ashamed to admit it. A lot of writers are, a lot of authors are. I don't know why that is, but I am not ashamed to admit that I would pray every morning, to give me the strength to continue writing this. I mean, at this point, it was, it's twice as long as War and Peace. It's 1.2 million words. And when I, got into it, I just was just weary, and I prayed for the strength to keep going. I prayed that the next plot point or the next character point or the next scene would come to me. Um, I prayed for. I really just I just really prayed for the strength to just keep going. There was something driving me to write this, and I wasn't going to quit. I wasn't going to stop, but I still needed that strength every day to continue. And I have a number of quotes uh, on a whiteboard in my office that I would always go to. And the one that I leaned on the most it was a quote by Nelson Mandela, who said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And I can't tell you, Curtis, how many times I would have read that and thought about what he lived through on Robben Island. I think he was in prison 28 years unjustly, and you know came out of prison and became the president of South Africa. I mean, everything he overcame. But that quote really gave me strength over time. It was just, it's always impossible until it's done. And so there were times when I was like, Chris, you have this is impossible. What the hell were you thinking in starting this damn thing? And I would just say that to myself. I would say Nelson Mandela said, it's always impossible until it's done. And I'm looking forward to when the last episode is published in uh, November, December of 2027, because as soon as it's done, Curtis, I plan on taking taking a 3 month vacation, uh, probably in the Caribbean if I can.
Okay, well, tell us about any other upcoming projects that you're working on that listeners need to be aware of.
Well, this is it. I mean, I haven't been working on anything except bodaciously for the past 10 years. Uh, and the project is basically that every 12 weeks, starting in January, there's going to be another novel, the continuing story of Avery Craig and his friends. And you know, it's just it's basically going to be it's basically going to be just a continuation of everything I've been doing. You know, I'd like to say a couple of things here about, I think I glossed over how I've done this, how I've done this, and I think I learned some things in writing this that could be of service to all of your listeners. Anybody, certainly anybody who's embarking on a big project or they're dealing with a problem that they think is insurmountable or impossible. One of the things I learned, Curtis, was you can't get overwhelmed by the magnitude of the thing that you're working on or dealing with. You have to break the big thing into small steps. And so anytime I found myself becoming overwhelmed with the size of the project, I would just say, what is the next small step I can take? And I became very good at breaking up the big thing into a number of small steps. So, write, I would write 1,500 words a day. And if I, was editing a chapter, focus on one page at a time, one page at a time, one paragraph at a time, one sentence at a time, and just do each of those to the best of my ability. The other thing I learned was how important it is to have focus without distractions. You really have to eliminate the distractions in your life if you're going to be wrestling with a big problem or you have a big creative project that you're trying to accomplish. There's so many distractions today. We could both go on and on about them, but I found that I unplugged basically entirely from the internet between 2015 and 2025. And as a result, a number of these apps and technologies are foreign to me now. But I know that I couldn't have written this had I been checking my email every 10 minutes or had my phone around to read or listen to, get text on, or, watching TikTok videos in the middle of the day. You have to decide what your priority is. And for me, my priority was writing and finishing all 9 of these novels. And I'd say the final thing that I learned that is so important if you're going to be doing something over a long period of time. You have to have the ability, you got to develop the ability to delay gratification. And that's hard today, because we're all bombarded by, you know, likes and the quick and easy fix and, the 10-second news cycle. But if you want to have the success of finishing a big project, it's going to take time, and things tend to take twice as long as you think they will. So you really have to have that ability to delay gratification. And so I've been delaying the gratification of publishing now for 10 years, and I do have to admit that I'm glad that this is gonna give birth to some of this, very soon.
We'll throw out your contact info so people can keep up with everything that you're up to.
Sure. I think the best way is simply go to Amazon and you type in Chris Orcutt, and you're going to see all of my novels as well as the Bodaciously novels. But if you wanted to read my blog or read more about me and my work, you can go to Orcutt, ORCUTT.net. And I've been told by quite a few aspiring writers that they've complimented me saying that, I've got a lot of writing advice on there. Um, I don't know how it came about, but I've got over, 20 plus years of blog pieces about elements of writing and techniques and things I've learned. So if there are any aspiring novelists out there who want to, learn some things about craft or just basically the work of being a novelist, then go to my website.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Orcutt.net. Please be sure to check out everything that Chris is up to and check out this new novel, these 9 books when they come out. Follow, rate, review, share this episode to as many people as possible. And for more information on the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, please visit www.curveball337.com and share the website and the show to everybody you know. Thank you for listening and supporting the show. And Chris, thank you for all that you do, and thank you for joining me.
My pleasure, Curtis. Thank you for having me.
For more information on the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, visit www.curveball337.com. Until next time, keep living the dream.